Welcome to In Pursuit of Truth. This is your host, Sir Patrick Mack. Boys and girls, we got ourselves a full-blown dog and pony show. Only this week, we're going to call it Impeachment Inquiry. And I got a live update on that. There you go. You're welcome. Well, look, there's a lot of talk about this whole whistleblower thing, and honestly, I don't want to go into it too much. There's a couple other things I want to talk at you about, but of course, that is the hubbub around D.C., and Democrats freaking out, wanting to start impeachment inquiry. They're even divided on this, but that looks to be the case, and of course, this was all this anger coming out about this conversation between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And, of course, Democrats were freaking out saying, release the transcripts. And President Trump's like, okay. And they're like, no, serious, do it now. And President Trump's like, all right, it's online now already. So go check it out. And Democrats are like, oh, he's such a racist. And, of course, leading that charge is House Intelligence Chair, little Adam Schiff. And he did himself a little dramatic reading the other day. And I got that, too.
My colleagues may think it's okay. You might think that's okay. My colleagues might think it's okay. You 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 might think it's okay that you might think it's okay. You might think that's okay. You might think it's okay. You might think it's okay that you might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay. You might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that I don't. You might think it's okay that later that day. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay. I don't think that's okay. You might think that it's okay that I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that you might think that it's okay. You might think it's okay and you might think it's okay. You might say that's all okay. You might say that's just what you need, but I don't think it's okay. And the day we do think that's okay, that later that day is the day we will look back and say that I don't think that's okay. I don't think it's okay. You might think it's okay. I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's okay. You might think it's okay. I don't think it's okay. You might say that's all okay. I don't think that's okay today.
God, dog, that guy's exhausting. All right, I'm just kidding. That's a parody video. That's a burn video I made months ago. Still funny, though, and you should know that.
My colleague is right on both counts. It's not okay.
Well, I do think it's okay. You made up a story. I can make up a story about you, too. What you think about that?
My summary of the president's call was meant to be at least part in parody.
Yeah, well, it was a crap parody. Mine, however, was dope because I used your own words. Yep, you just made them up. Made up a whole conversation that Trump didn't say.
Of course, the president never said, if you don't understand me, I'm going to say it 7 more times. My point is, that's the message that the Ukraine president was receiving in not so many words.
So many words? How about none of those words? Because you made them all up, Adam Schiff.
It's not okay.
All right. Well, here are the documents that have been dropped by John Solomon. Thanks for that. We're over here at Scrib.com, and this link will be down below in the video description if you don't have this already. And there's lots to chew on here. I haven't had a ton of time to go through tons of this, so we won't dissect a ton of it as of now, but I do want to walk you through a little bit right here. This one is entitled Kavalek-Less Redacted Memo. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Kathleen Kavalek typed memo about meeting with Christopher Steele with redactions lifted by the FBI. And here it is, notes from the meeting with Christopher Steele and Tatiana Duran of Orbis Security. Background: Orbis undertook the investigation into the Russia-Trump connection at the behest of an institution he declined to identify that had been hacked. All right. And of course, Orbis was Christopher Steele's little get out, right? So evidently this institution got hacked. He doesn't want to identify them. Maybe he's trying to protect them even further. The institution approached them based on the recommendation of Glenn Simpson. Of course, that's from Fusion GPS fame. And Peter Fritz, specialist in economic crime, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, and is keen to see this information come to light prior to November 8th. Orbis undertook the investigation in June of 2016. All right, then we've got some redacted parts right here. But here's what I want to talk about. Contacts between Trump via Manafort and the Kremlin that go back to about 2013, about the time he took Miss Universe to Moscow. Steele stressed that while Trump was filmed engaged in compromising activities with prostitutes and the Ritz-Carlton, the Russians have not needed to use that compromise on him as he was already interested in cooperation. Steele said he is persuaded the story about the prostitutes is accurate because they had their source speak with hotel contacts who confirmed, one, that the FSB was in the hotel while Trump was there, okay, and Trump regularly availed himself of prostitutes while in Moscow. Steele indicated that this operation is run by the Kremlin, former Kremlin COS Sergei Ivanov, Dmitry Peskov, and President Putin, and not the FSB. Presidential advisor Vladislav Surkov and Vyacheslav Trubnikov, former head of Russian External Intelligence Service, are also involved. Manafort has been the go-between with the campaign. Ivanov persuaded Putin it was possible to use the hacked information and run an operation without being detected, while others argued against it. All right. So the reason I'm taking you back here is because there's been something kind of stuck in my craw regarding all this. Now, I am no expert in all these Russian connections, Ukrainian connections. It's really, really, really complicated. But the essence of the story keeps kind of sticking out at me. Here we go. These connections going back to 2013. Orbis undertook the investigation in June of 2016. So you got Orbis, Christopher Steele, Glenn Simpson, President Trump, Putin, Manafort. This is where all the connections start. And from there, it kind of branches out, right? But the point is that I want to make is that this is where we really start to kind of pivot towards Manafort. And if you remember, Manafort pleaded guilty to tax fraud, and he got put away, and he got put away hard, didn't he? As a matter of fact, solitary confinement. Really? For tax fraud? And of course, he was a representative for Yanukovych back in the day. So there's your Ukraine connection. Well, there's our Ukraine connection, right? And that's where it all starts to connect. And like I said, he got put away super, super hard. And it was Robert Mueller who went after him. So I always found this very, very interesting. And of course, he also had this lobbying firm with Roger Stone. Another guy they went after kind of excessively hard, right? So was this really about these crimes, or was this really about maybe something that Manafort knew? Now, we don't really ever talk about that much because we don't have any chance to get to him, right? And that's what I find so odd. Here we got a guy like Jeffrey Epstein, who you would think would be public enemy number one. Somebody waltzed in and somehow hung him or whatever. We know that whatever happened there with Jeffrey Epstein was bunk. Here he was in maximum security. Somebody was able to get to him, and yet we can't seem to get to Paul Manafort. Why is that?
Got a flashback aside, yeah, take you back,
Taking you back to Q Post 1455 from the 12th of June 2018. And Q begins talking about these London pics, previous London pics. And if you're not familiar with that, I suggest going back to probably my June 13th video. But we were talking about some pictures that were taken in London. We assumed them to be, it was a group of people crossing the street and heading towards the Corinthia Hotel. And this was taken by a security camera from a nearby bridge. We assumed that one of them was probably Peter Strzok. Another was Lisa Page. We weren't really sure who the other ones were. Could be Brennan, could be Comey. Well, I'm not really sure. We can't really tell, but we do know that a couple of them were likely Strzok and Page. But either way, this was when this all began. And we had a whole bunch of pictures in regards to this. Year determined, relevant, 2015, 2016, when this whole thing began. Find the markers, streets surrounding updates. Okay, well, like I just said, we knew that we were around the Corinthia Hotel. And of course, the Corinthia Hotel is, basically MI6, right? You've got Scotland Yard right there. And a lot of good suggestions to let us know exactly what we're dealing with here. And of course, Q confirms here UK SIS being a senior intelligence services, White House, CIA without the I because they don't have the intelligence, FBI, DOJ, joint treason. Now, this is the curious part. You have a choice. SIS, good agents. The time is now. Contact windows. And then we have good again in brackets. Good. And then Q says something very curious here, which is what I want to point out. Biblical. So, look. We've talked about this at great length here, and the reason why I'm bringing this up here is this looks like Q was giving a call back here in June of 2018 for some senior intelligence agents to come forward. Now, what were they coming forward with? Not really sure. The only thing that Q leaves us is biblical. Well, what is a Bible? A Bible is a collection of books. And I've put this out before, and I'm going to put it out again because this is my whole point. When I put it out before, I asked about this, and I got a lot of different responses in regards to the Holy Bible and references and good and evil and deep stories, and I get that, but I don't think that's what Q is talking about here. A Bible is simply a collection of books. Q isn't necessarily referencing the Holy Bible. Now, I think in some cases we are. I do think there's a bigger picture here, and I'm not discounting that. But I'm just saying in this particular case, I'm wondering if this biblical reference, especially in the context of where we're just taking it here, wasn't something very much along the lines of maybe, who knows, a collection of ledgers. Now, we don't know if that Manafort ledger was good or not because we haven't seen it, and we don't really have anything to verify it, so there's no real way of knowing. But my only point is that here you got this guy, Paul Manafort, who has been around for a very, very long time, has advised a lot of people. As a matter of fact, it was rumored that back in the day, Manafort had even warned Reagan about Bush Sr. This goes back to even Prescott Bush and I don't want to go way back into that, but just keep in mind that Manafort knew the goods on everybody. Whether or not he was good or bad, he was probably capitalizing off of both sides. That's the way it at least looks like to me. But either way, he was maintaining some ledgers. And whether this ledger was good enough to be the basis for the Trump-Russia collusion thing doesn't really matter. It got it all started, right? And if there's one ledger, maybe there's other ledgers. After all, the best way to keep some of this information isn't to put it on some sort of, computer chip or, card or whatever it is. It's hand-to-hand submission, right? Or just keeping it buried. So maybe these books and ledgers are stashed all over the places, and maybe these good agents just happen to be aware of some of the locations and can release such at a time. As a matter of fact, this information would be so important that it would be worth putting somebody like Manafort in solitary confinement over, right? After all, when they wanted him to testify, they wanted him to testify about the Ukraine, his dealings. They wanted to know what he did, and that was all they cared about, and then they dropped the hammer and put him away. We never heard from him again. Well, what if he had some other things to say? What if he had some other things to say? Devin Nunes has teased that he might have some more to say, which leads me to think that maybe this biblical reference is indeed a sign that there are more ledgers to come, or at least more sources of information to come. Paul Manafort might very well have been privy to that information. Keep in mind, this guy has been around for so long. Shoot, he posed as a CNN reporter to get information from an Indian interview. This guy was wrapped up in HUD. This guy was wrapped up in everything. So if he was wrapped up in everything, you wouldn't want to keep any kind of records of this on some sort of computer format. You would probably want to do it all by hand. And that was exactly the implication of this ledger. Even though we talk about the Steele dossier all the time, we don't really talk much about this ledger. Whether or not it's bunk, I don't know. But just a suggestion for you. And for those of you who might be privy to this, you can let me know. Now, before we go on to the next story, I want to point out my last two videos because it'll probably help give a little context to what I want to talk about next. They're entitled Orange Band Bad from the 23rd and Impeachy from the 25th. And both videos touch up on some incidents that had happened in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area. Particularly this overdose or a poisoning or something like that, but they were wearing these orange bands as if they were coming from an event. Now, from what I always understood, sometimes you would do like, you could do military exercises and stuff like that, and if you were using mass casualty or anything like that, or something where you wanted to, kind of demark a bunch of people, you might use these bands. But these bands also could have been from a nightclub or, who knows. But either way, they found people dead. The other few people were in the hospital. Go back and check out Orange Band Bad in regards to that. But at the same time, we also had an active crisis drill that was going on, and that was going to be based at the David Lawrence Center in Pittsburgh. And so I was asking some of you guys to keep eye out for anything that was going on. And of course, a lot of you guys responded saying there was a ton of military stuff that you saw in the area, helicopters, planes. A lot of you guys had kind of the same stories, just in different areas, but it was all roughly the same area. So I don't want to rehash the stories that I just did, but we talk about that more in this video here entitled Impeachy. But I just wanted to point out that that's what we were looking at. Well, lo and behold, we did have an event at a David Lawrence Center, only it turned out to be the David Lawrence Center in Florida. Collier County, Florida. Collier County Sheriff's Office confirmed there was no active shooter found at the David Lawrence Center located at 6075, I don't know if that's Bathy or Bathy Lane in Naples. Deputies were called to Building C, which holds adult outpatient services, on Tuesday after an alert was triggered of an active shooter in the building. The David Lawrence Center is a rehabilitation and mental health treatment center. Of course it is. Deputies did preliminary searches at the campuses and no shooter or victims were found. 100 units as well as off-duty deputies responded to the center. In an active shooter investigation, everybody responds, Collier County Sheriff Kevin Ransbach said. The incident began after receiving multiple 911 calls reporting an active shooter. One of the callers was a David Lawrence Center employee who said they received an alert on their computer indicating that there was an active shooter on the property. Collier County deputies are investigating to determine how the alert was activated. Business will resume as normal on Wednesday, according to the CEO of the David Lawrence Center. Okay, so this was clear across the country, but oddly enough, I had just been talking about an event going on possibly at the David Lawrence Center. Well, we knew that their active crisis drill was going to go on. We didn't exactly know. We had also had a tip of the nearby U.S. Steel Center being evacuated. And of course, this had all happened within under 5 miles of where we had this original situation with the orange band. So like I said, watch those 2 videos if you want to get some context here. So it looks like we were definitely onto something here, but it turned out to be a David Lawrence Center in Florida. Now, they're saying that this was not an actual event, that this was proven to be, it says, no active shooter found, but multiple 911 calls. Okay. Well, oddly enough, also in this video, in Peachy, I mentioned about it was another public service announcement saying that there was an event going on at the Chicago Zoo. And of course, this was going to involve simulated live fire, Once again, go back to the video if you want to get the details. But this was another military exercise. And just like the military exercise in Pittsburgh, we had a corresponding event. Chicago police say that a bomb threat that briefly shut down downtown CTA service in the Loop was unfounded, and trains have resumed their regular routes. The threat was reported at the Clark and Lake Street CTA stop, according to police. Service on the blue, brown, orange, purple, pink, and green lines was interrupted by the threat, but the CTA now says the trains are resuming service after police activity. Serious residual delays are still expected. And of course, here's the Twitter advisement here. So here we go. We had another military exercise right at the same time, and then a corresponding event. Now, are they related? I'm not really sure, but it seems mathematically very, very improbable, right? And we had just talked about this the day before. What I found curious about both of these events is that they happened within 48 hours of my video, but that they also turned out to be just these sort of empty threats. You had threats being called in. So it makes me wonder what the motive for these situations were. Is this just something to debunk? Maybe say, I don't know, my news? I don't really know. Or were these real situations that just got tipped off? I'm not really sure. But either way, I find it very, very curious. Finally, let me leave you with this. Stem cells for dozens of cancer patients destroyed after freezer malfunction at Children's Hospital, LA. More than 4 dozen cancer patients at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles lost their stored stem cells when a freezer at the hospital failed. Those stem cells harvested from the children before they underwent chemotherapy and radiation treatments were frozen in case their cancer should return. One of the freezer's sensors failed and the notification process failed, and so we lost those specimens, said Dr. James Stein, CHLA's chief medical officer. Stein added that the families of 56 children have been notified of the stem cell loss. Sean Anderson Coronoa, 13, is one of the patients whose stem cells were destroyed. The 8th grader went through stem cell therapy when he was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma, and in November he'll be cancer-free for 3 years. Well, congratulations, Sean. But harvesting those stem cells can be a grueling ordeal for children. Yeah, harvesting in children always sounds bad, just, in general. The process involves injections and requires the child to be hooked up for a day or two to machines that separate the stem cells from the rest of the blood. It was painful, Sean said. I would try to sleep and my body would just start shaking, and then I just started to freak out and I'd start crying. Sean's mother, Elizabeth Anderson, is worried that should her son's cancer return, it may not be possible to harvest more stem cells from his blood. Once you've, through that whole process of doing all the treatment, you've damaged your body, said Anderson. That's how damaging chemo is, or the radiation alone. And so it's the same with the stem cells. He doesn't have that as an option to just collect more. However, Stein says the patients who lost their stem cells to the freezer failure can go through the harvesting process again. All right, and I guess that's the part that's really disturbing, and this breaks my heart for this young kid here. But I find this very strange that this freezer just all of a sudden breaks down, everybody loses it, and this is coming, of course, on the heels of Planned Parenthood losing all this funding. I'm sure it's completely unrelated, but here we go, and this was just a freezer failure, malfunction, and now they're encouraging people to go through the harvesting process again. How about that? Were there to be a recurrence of disease that required stem cells, the patients can have their stem cells collected again, Stein said. Anderson is also upset that the hospital notified families by mailing a letter last week, one that was addressed to her son. She said had she known that was what was in the letter, she would have chosen not to tell Sean. Instead, the boy read of the stem cell loss and burst into tears. All right, well, this is really, really horrible, but I want to point one more thing out here. This is what says basically what happened since then. Safeguards were in place at the time, but were insufficient. Since that time, we have replaced the freezer that malfunctioned, upgraded our sensor monitoring and alert system, double-checked all power supply sources, increased our maintenance schedule, and launched training for the engineering team on the new system. Wow, so you got a lot done since then, which leads me to think that you've always been able to do that. Which leads me to think that maybe those safeguards were always in place, right? Safeguards were in place. This was a big deal. And, I don't know this kid, Sean. I don't know if this is even a real kid, Sean. I wouldn't challenge that. My only point is that this is a horrible, horrible story for these people to go through. Very, very painful process. And now all of a sudden they want to harvest again. My bad. And they just basically sent an apology by mail. And somehow we're able to upgrade all this stuff in record time, it would seem. I don't really know what the time frame was, but this seems very, very strange to me. Now, I also want to point out, because the obvious search that I went from there was their proximity at Children's Hospital to Planned Parenthood. As you can see right there, it's under a mile. So it's just a stone's throw away. And of course, that leads me to my next search, only a couple miles, really about a little under 3 miles to the nearest FedEx. And I'm not going to go into that story for those people who understand where I'm going with. You know where I'm going with. And I'm not necessarily saying that or implying that or anything like that, but I just find this very, very odd, particularly at this time where Planned Parenthood is losing their funding, that something like this, so irresponsible, would happen, and it just happens to do with harvesting children's stem cells. All right, Patriots, that's all I got for you for now. I'm going to get Pursuity on the Weatherman this weekend, and I will see you next week. As always, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to all of you who do that already. If you're new to my channel, welcome to you. Please understand that from time to time, you're going to get unclicked and unnotified and unsubscribed and all that stuff. Just do me a favor and check yourself. just click yourself back, and I would greatly appreciate it. All my alternate links are down below: Gab, BitChute, Brighteon.com, DropSpace. Some of them don't always work, but I try and post every time, and it just depends. The ones that will go ahead and upload, then I'll go ahead and upload. And the ones that give me trouble, I just move on. But overall, they're all working pretty well. I've got a new Gab at IPOT 1776. That's IPOT 1776. And if you're on Twitter, join me at IPOT 1776. It's the same thing over there. All those links are down below. My email is down below if you'd like to send me some information. Please, please, please do not DM me. Those of you who DM me, I can tell you don't watch the end of my videos. Please don't DM me. Send me an email if you've got some information you'd like to share. That's down below. My P.O. box is down below if you'd like to send me something old school. And if you'd like to support the channel, my Patreon is also linked down below. It's all down below, as well as the show notes. And I will leave you these John Solomon links down below too. So all of it's down below. All right, kids, this is Sir Patrick Mack. And until next time, stay funky.